The words hung in the air, thick and cloying like the stale scent of desperation and cheap cologne. They weren't shouted, not really. David, my son, preferred the quiet, insidious stab. He'd leaned forward across my antique mahogany dining table, his face a mask of aggrieved entitlement, his voice a low, venomous hiss. His eyes, so like his father's, but twisted with a resentment my husband had never truly harbored, bore into mine. I remember the exact second. The clink of ice in my crystal glass, the distant wail of an ambulance siren fading into the affluent quiet of our suburban street, the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Ordinary sounds, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, shattered by an extraordinary cruelty. I was 78. 78 years I'd walked this earth, seen wars end, felt love blossom and wither, buried a husband, raised 2 children. I'd navigated treacherous social waters, built a respectable life out of scraps and sheer will, and guarded a past so carefully concealed it felt like a ghost limb. I thought I was beyond surprise, beyond hurt. I was wrong. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, the world tilted. A cold, sharp pain, like a shard of ice, pierced something deep within me. My son. My only son. The child I'd carried, nurtured, endlessly supported, had just wished me dead. Not in a fit of teenage angst, but as a grown man, a man whose entire existence was predicated on my unwavering financial generosity. Then, something shifted. The pain didn't dissipate, but it coalesced, hardened, became something else entirely. It wasn't just anger, though a fiery, unfamiliar heat bloomed in my chest. It was a clarity so profound, so utterly devastating, that it felt like an awakening. The illusion, the comfortable, carefully constructed lie I had been living for decades, crumbled around me like dry plaster. Is that so, David? My voice, to my own surprise, was calm, almost detached. It was the voice of Meredith Blackwood, the refined, old-money matron, not the woman whose blood was now roaring in her ears. You truly believe that my demise would be a gift? He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that spoke volumes of his contempt. Look, Mom, it's not personal. It's just. I'm almost out of options. The investor pulled out of the crypto venture, the divorce settlement ate through my savings, and now the bank's threatening foreclosure on the condo. If you were gone, the inheritance, well, it would solve everything, wouldn't it? He actually looked hopeful, as if he were discussing a potential business merger, not my death. The gall. The utter, breathtaking gall. He spoke of my inheritance as if it were his birthright, a deferred payment for the inconvenience of having me as a mother. He saw me as a means to an end, a walking ATM with a pulse. And suddenly, I truly saw him, for the first time in perhaps 30 years. A parasitic vine, slowly strangling the very tree that sustained it. My mind, usually a well-ordered archive of polite conversation and domestic concerns, began to furiously click through memories. David's countless startups that invariably failed, requiring another infusion of capital. His exorbitant alimony, covered by my monthly transfers. His increasingly desperate calls, his thinly veiled threats if I ever dared to question his expenditures. And Laura, my daughter, not as overtly demanding, but equally dependent on the supplemental income one provided to maintain her comfortable suburban lifestyle. For so long, I had believed I was doing my duty. Providing for my children, ensuring their comfort, making up for the perceived emotional distance of their father, a man who, though kind, was more comfortable with ledgers than lullabies. I had buried myself. Buried the woman I once was, the woman who knew how to fight, how to survive, how to win. I had chosen a life of quiet sacrifice, believing it was the right path, the only path. But David's words had ripped open the earth over my grave. And the woman beneath, though older, though scarred, was not dead. She was merely sleeping. And now, she was awake. I see, I said, my gaze steady, betraying none of the earthquake rumbling inside me. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip of the expensive scotch, letting the amber liquid coat my tongue. It tasted of peat and old grudges. Well, David, if my death is the only gift you truly desire, then I suppose it's time to consider alternative arrangements. He scoffed, a relieved smirk playing on his lips. Meaning what? You're finally going to update your will and make sure everything goes to me? That's what I've been telling you for years, Mom. Laura's set with Mark's salary, but I'm truly struggling. I allowed a faint, humorless smile to touch my lips. Oh, no, David. Quite the opposite. My death would indeed be a gift. But not for you. For me, perhaps. A release from the burden of supporting someone who wishes me gone. And as for you, well, let's just say, the gifts are about to stop. His smug expression dissolved into confusion, then alarm. What are you talking about? I set my glass down precisely, the delicate clink echoing in the sudden silence. I'm talking about your quarterly allowance. Your mortgage payments. Your credit card bills. All of it. As of this moment, David, it's over. His jaw dropped. You can't do that. Oh, but I can. I have. I just did. My voice remained calm, but inside, a cold, hard resolve was setting in. I've tolerated your disrespect, your entitlement, your endless demands for too long. But to wish me dead, that, David, is a line you should never have crossed. I rose from the table, my joints protesting slightly, but my spine rigid. My gaze swept across the meticulously arranged dining room, a room that represented the life I had built, the life I had sacrificed for. You will find, David, I continued, walking towards the study, the click of my sensible heels echoing on the polished hardwood, that the silence can be very, very expensive. And you, my dear son, are about to pay the price. He stammered, followed me, his voice rising in panic. Mom, wait. You don't understand. This isn't fair. I have debts, I have responsibilities. I opened the door to my study, a sanctuary filled with the scent of old books and leather. Then I suggest you start learning how to meet them, David. Like every other adult on this planet. I turned, my eyes, though ancient, holding a spark of something he had never seen before, something dangerous, something utterly unyielding. Consider this your inheritance, son. The gift of self-sufficiency. It's a hard lesson, but one you clearly need. With that, I closed the door, leaving him sputtering in the dining room. The silence that followed was not the quiet hum of ordinary life. It was the silence of a dam cracking, of ancient waters finally breaking free. I walked to my desk, picked up the phone, and dialed Mr. Henderson, my lawyer. Arthur, I said, my voice steady, I need you to freeze all transfers to David and Laura Blackwood, effective immediately. And then I need you to draw up a new will. A very different one. A long dormant part of me, a part one thought I'd buried forever, was stirring. David's cruel words hadn't just ended his comfortable life, they had resurrected mine. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the sleeping serpent had just awakened. There were old scores to settle, and not just with my ungrateful children. This was just the beginning. The telephone began its relentless assault before dawn, an angry, persistent buzz that vibrated through the floorboards of my otherwise peaceful home. It was still dark, the pre-dawn hush clinging to the old oak trees outside my window, but my sleep had already been thin, punctuated by fragmented dreams of younger days, of decisions made in shadows. I knew who it was. It could only be David. I let it ring. And ring. And ring again. There was a perverse satisfaction in imagining his increasing frustration, the way his brow would furrow, the frantic energy that would emanate from him as he realized I wasn't playing his game anymore. For decades, I had been tethered to that phone, a silent witness to his escalating crises, a willing participant in his financial bailouts. No more. By the time the sun had fully risen, painting my living room in hues of pale gold, my answering machine light was blinking furiously. There were 7 messages from David. The first few were outraged, demanding explanations, accusing me of mental instability and cruelty. The middle ones turned to pleading, promises of reform, assurances that he loved me very much and that he needed me. The last one, left just moments before I finally switched off the machine, was a chilling return to his true self, a thinly veiled threat about telling Laura everything if I didn't immediately reconsider. Laura's call came an hour later, more measured, but equally imbued with an expectation of explanation and immediate reversal. "Mom, what on earth is going on with David? He's completely unhinged. He says you've cut him off, that you're changing your will? What is this, some kind of midlife crisis for you?" Her voice was tight, a brittle politeness barely concealing her own anxiety about her financial umbilical cord. "It's not a crisis, Laura," I replied, my voice steady, as I poured myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, the aroma comforting and familiar. "It's a decision. David has expressed his desire for me to be gone. I merely obliged him by removing myself from his immediate financial landscape. As for you, your quarterly transfers will also cease." There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Mom, you can't be serious. My children's private school tuition, the mortgage on our vacation home, you promised. You always said you'd ensure we were taken care of." "And I did," I countered, my gaze sweeping across my sun-drenched kitchen, a testament to the comfortable life I had meticulously built. "For a very long time. But promises, my dear, can be broken. Especially when the recipient demonstrates such profound ingratitude." David's words were merely the catalyst. Your quiet acceptance of his behavior, your own convenient reliance on my generosity, has merely solidified my resolve. "But Mom, this is extreme. Think of the grandchildren. Think of us." Laura's voice was now laced with desperation, a familiar tune that usually preceded my capitulation. "I have thought of you all, Laura," I said, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in my voice, quickly suppressed. "More than you will ever know. Perhaps now, you will too. I'm afraid this conversation is concluded." I hung up before she could formulate another plea, another accusation. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of emotional blackmail and frustrated rage directed my way. Texts, emails, even a dramatic, tearful visit from David where he pounded on my door, threatening to call the police for elder abuse. I didn't answer. I merely watched from behind my drawn curtains, a spectator to the unraveling of a life I had so carefully cushioned. It was liberating, in a strange, exhilarating way. For years, I had felt the crushing weight of expectation, the quiet resentment building within me as I signed check after check, listened to endless complaints, and saw my efforts met with disdain rather than gratitude. I had allowed myself to be defined by my role as mom, grandma, the generous benefactor. But beneath that veneer, something harder, something older, had been simmering. I walked through my home, a sanctuary filled with cherished antiques, rare books, and the quiet echoes of a life well lived, at least on the surface. My fingers traced the delicate carving on a queen and table, a piece I'd acquired through unconventional means decades ago. Each item told a story, not just of its origin, but of the sacrifices made, the battles fought, the choices that had shaped the woman I was today. In my study, a room where the scent of aged paper and leather always calmed my mind, I paused by a framed photograph on my desk. It wasn't recent, not one of the smiling, holiday snapshots of my family. This was an older one, faded sepia, taken perhaps 50 years ago. A young woman stared out from the frame, her dark hair pulled back severely, her eyes, though young, already holding a world of experience, a hint of steel that few would notice now. She was dressed simply, not in the silks and cashmere I favored, but in practical, unadorned clothing. There was a faint scar above her left eyebrow, almost imperceptible now. That was me. Meredith Blackwood, before the quiet life, before the children, before the pretense of genteel retirement. That was the woman who had fought for every inch of her existence, who had learned the harsh realities of a world that didn't suffer weakness gladly. I picked up the photo, my thumb tracing the outline of her resolute jawline. I had buried her, that woman. buried her deep beneath layers of respectability, polite smiles, and perfectly timed social engagements. I had tried to erase the memories of the choices I'd made, the lines I'd crossed, the people I'd outwitted. But David's words, his cruel, thoughtless wish, had been a shovel to the grave. The woman in the photo looked back at me, a silent challenge in her gaze. She was a survivor. She was a strategist. And she knew how to make people pay. The comfortable, serene Meredith Blackwood had been a carefully crafted performance, a shield against a past that refused to stay buried. But now, the shield was down. I set the photo back down, a faint smile playing on my lips. It wasn't a happy smile, but one of grim determination. "Yes, David," I whispered to the empty room, my voice a dry rustle. "My death would be a gift. But not the one you envisioned. It would be the death of the benevolent mother, the easy mark. And in her place, well, you'll see." My quiet routine suddenly felt constricting. The familiar comfort of my home, once a sanctuary, now seemed like a gilded cage. I needed to move. I needed to act. There were old debts, not just financial, that needed collecting. And there was one name, one face, that had haunted my peripheral vision for too long, a ghost from my past whose success had always felt like an affront to everything I once believed in. Harrison O'Connor. The silence in my home was no longer heavy with expectation. It was light, almost airy, vibrating with the promise of something new. Something dangerous. My sleep had been thin, but now, a strange energy coursed through my veins. The serpent, indeed, was awake. And she was hungry. The storm of angry phone calls and accusatory texts from David and Laura eventually subsided into a sullen silence, broken only by the occasional manipulative email from David, laced with guilt trips about his struggling family and missed opportunities. I ignored them all. My resolve, hardened by David's cruel wish, remained unyielding. My usual Tuesday afternoon bridge game was cancelled. My friends, a polite group of women whose lives revolved around country club gossip and charity luncheons, found my sudden inaccessibility rather rude, I'm sure. But I found myself strangely unconcerned with their polite disapproval. The world I had inhabited for so long now felt thin, almost transparent, revealing the starker realities beneath. It was Wednesday when the call came, a quiet chime that was a stark contrast to the cacophony of the past few days. It was Claire. My granddaughter. "Grandma? Are you all right? Mom and Dad are saying, well, they're saying you've gone a bit rogue." Her voice was soft, genuinely concerned, lacking the sharp edge of entitlement I'd grown accustomed to. Claire was different. Always had been. "Rogue, dear? Is that what they're calling it now?" I allowed a faint, dry chuckle to escape. "I suppose it's one word for shedding the weight of expectation. They're really upset, you know," she continued, a note of hesitancy in her tone. "Especially Uncle David. He's practically tearing his hair out. Says you've left him completely stranded." Indeed. A valuable lesson in self-reliance, wouldn't you agree, for a man approaching his mid-50s? I leaned back in my favorite armchair, the warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the bay window onto my lap. Claire was attending university, studying journalism, a choice that pleased me more than I ever let on. She had a keen mind, a thirst for truth, and a stubborn refusal to accept things at face value, traits she certainly hadn't inherited from her mother. "I guess so," Claire said slowly. "But, it seems pretty drastic, Grandma. You've always been so generous. What changed?" This was it. The question no one else had dared to ask directly, the chink in the armor of their self-pity. Claire wasn't asking for money, or making demands. She was asking to understand. "What changed, my dear?" I began, my voice softer now, tinged with a weariness I rarely allowed myself to show, was a clarity of vision. A realization that I had spent too long living a life that wasn't entirely my own. I've carried burdens, Claire, for a very long time. Burdens born of promises, of perceived obligations, of a desire to bury a past that refused to stay buried. There was a silence on the line, a listening silence, not an impatient one. I pictured her, perched somewhere on campus, perhaps in the library, notebook open, absorbing my words with the analytical ear of a budding journalist. "Are you talking about Grandpa Robert?" she ventured, gently. "I always wondered why you never really talked about your life before you met him. It's like you just appeared." I smiled faintly. Claire, bless her inquisitive heart, had always sensed the deeper currents. She had been the only one who showed genuine interest in my past, in the stories untold. She'd often asked about old photographs, about my youth, questions I'd always expertly deflected. "Robert was a good man," I said, my voice distant now, drifting back in time. "But there was a life before Robert. A very different life. One filled with complications. Old debts, old scores that were never truly settled." I paused, letting the words hang. Claire would connect the dots later, or try to. It wasn't time to reveal everything, but it was time to sow the seeds. "Grandma, you're scaring me a little," she admitted, but her tone was more intrigued than frightened. "What kind of debts? What kind of scores?" "The kind that linger," I replied, a flinty edge entering my voice. "The kind that define who you become, even when you try desperately to outrun them." I tried to live a quiet life, Claire. A respectable life. For your mother, for your uncle, for your grandfather. I thought I could put it all behind me. But some things, some people, they have a way of resurfacing. Like a bad penny. I heard the rustle of paper on her end, a pen scratching. She was taking notes. "Good. And you've decided now is the time to settle them?" she asked, her voice laced with a thrilling, almost dangerous curiosity. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it's merely time to ensure that those who have forgotten who I truly am are reminded." I took a deep breath. This was the delicate part. Involving Claire was risky, but she was the only one I trusted, the only one with the intelligence and the moral compass to navigate what was coming. "You're studying journalism, aren't you, dear? Investigative journalism, if I recall correctly?" "Yes, Grandma. I'm actually working on a piece about corporate ethics for my final project next semester." "Excellent. You have a sharp mind, Claire. A very keen eye for detail. And a certain fearlessness, I suspect." "I try," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "But what does that have to do with anything?" "I might have a project for you," I mused, letting the words hang, ripe with possibility. "A rather intricate, long-term investigation. One that might be far more compelling than any corporate ethics you've been delving into." "Oh." Her voice quickened, the journalist in her fully engaged. "About what?" "About a man. A very successful man, outwardly. A pillar of the community, even. Perhaps even considering a run for public office, if I'm not mistaken." I allowed myself a small, internal smile. The name tasted like ash on my tongue. "His name is Harrison O'Connor." A beat of silence. "O'Connor? The Harrison O'Connor? The tech mogul? The philanthropist? He just donated millions to the university's new science wing." "The very same," I confirmed, my voice dry as desert sand. "And perhaps, Claire, that's precisely why you should investigate him. The most pristine surfaces often hide the deepest cracks. There are stories, old stories, that surround Mr. O'Connor. Whispers, if you know where to listen. Things that never made it into the official biographies. And I believe, with your talents, you might be able to uncover them." "You want me to dig up dirt on Harrison O'Connor?" she asked, a mixture of awe and apprehension in her tone. "Grandma, he's practically untouchable." "What exactly are we looking for?" "We, my dear, are looking for the truth," I corrected gently. "And the truth, Claire, is rarely simple. It's often inconvenient. Sometimes, it's dangerous. But it's always there, waiting to be found." And this truth, I suspect, will be quite explosive. For Mr. O'Connor, certainly. And perhaps even for our family. I felt a pang of something akin to regret, a fleeting concern for the path I was setting her on. But it was quickly overshadowed by the surge of determination. Claire was strong. And she deserved to know the truth. All of it. Start with the public records, I advised. His early career, before he became the darling of Silicon Valley. Any obscure partnerships, any sudden disappearances of minor business associates. Any strange property dealings in, well, anywhere really. But especially in coastal Maine. A particular stretch of forgotten coastline. Maine, she echoed, puzzled. He's from California, isn't he? Officially, yes. But the official story, dear, is rarely the whole story. My gaze drifted to the framed sepia photo again. The young woman with the iron will. Consider it a unique journalistic assignment, Claire. One that could change everything you thought you knew. About Harrison O'Connor. And perhaps, about your grandmother. Okay, Grandma, she said, her voice betraying a hint of excitement now, the thrill of the chase overriding her initial apprehension. Harrison O'Connor. Coastal Maine. I'm on it. But, you're sure you're okay? Really okay? Never been better, my dear, I said, a genuine, if somewhat grim, smile forming on my lips. Never been better. I hung up the phone, a strange blend of relief and anticipation washing over me. The first domino had fallen. And my unexpected ally, my astute granddaughter, was about to pull the string that would unravel a carefully woven tapestry of lies. My past, the one I had tried so hard to bury, was finally, irrevocably, rising to the surface. And Harrison O'Connor, wherever he was, had no idea what was coming. Neither did David. The game, it seemed, was truly afoot. The decision was swift, decisive, and entirely mine. The suburban house, a monument to my carefully curated respectability, now felt like a stage from which I had just delivered my final, shattering performance. It was time to leave. Not forever, perhaps, but certainly for a significant period. I needed to go back. Back to where it all began, to the raw, untamed landscape that had forged the woman I was before I became Meredith Blackwood, respectable matriarch. I packed light, an unusual feat for a woman who owned enough designer scarves to outfit a small boutique. A single, sturdy leather suitcase held practical clothing, a few well-worn books, and a small, tarnished silver locket I hadn't worn in decades. No silk, no cashmere. Just practical denim, wool, and the kind of sensible walking shoes that could navigate uneven terrain. It felt like shedding a skin, an old, unnecessary shell. The drive was long, a slow, deliberate migration north and east. I bypassed the bustling interstates, opting instead for the winding, scenic back roads. The landscape changed gradually, subtly at first. The manicured lawns of suburbia gave way to rolling hills, then dense forests, and finally, as I crossed into Maine, a rugged, wild beauty that felt both alien and profoundly familiar. The air grew crisper, carrying the sharp, briny tang of the Atlantic. The light, even in late afternoon, had a certain clarity, a starkness that stripped away pretense. Each mile was a journey back in time. Memories, long suppressed, began to surface like debris from a sunken ship. Fragments of conversations, faces, the scent of damp earth and salt spray. I remembered the fierce independence I'd cultivated, the sharp edges I'd honed out of necessity. This wasn't the place of my idyllic youth, it was the crucible where a younger, harder Meredith had been forged. My internal monologue was a torrent of images, a vivid kaleidoscope of a life I'd tried to forget. I saw myself, young, ambitious, fueled by a potent mix of idealism and fierce anger at injustice. I saw faces of comrades, of mentors, of adversaries. Names whispered through my mind: Elijah, Thorne, Harrison. Especially Harrison. The man I had once almost trusted. The man whose betrayal had reshaped my world. There was a particular group, an informal but deeply committed network of activists and investigators in the early 70s, fighting against corruption in government and industry. We were young, idealistic, and dangerously naive in some ways, fiercely intelligent and resourceful in others. We believed we could change the world, expose the hidden machinations of power. And for a time, we almost did. I was central to that group, a master strategist, a meticulous researcher, with an unnerving ability to read people and situations. They called me the archivist for my uncanny ability to find and organize information, and shadow for my quiet, almost invisible efficiency. But idealism, I learned, was a fragile thing. It could be bought, betrayed, or simply crushed under the heel of ruthless ambition. Harrison O'Connor had been one of us, initially. Charismatic, brilliant, seemingly driven by the same righteous anger. But he had a darker ambition, a hunger for power and wealth that ultimately consumed him, twisting his initial ideals into something monstrous. He had exploited our trust, leveraged our findings for his own gain, and when our operations threatened to expose him, he had turned on us, leaving a trail of broken lives and shattered dreams. My own life had been collateral damage in his ruthless ascent. The car hummed along, a steady companion on this pilgrimage. The towns I passed through were smaller now, weathered by time and the elements. Lobster boats bobbed in chilly harbors, their colorful buoys dotting the slate-gray water. General stores with chipped paint and faded signs offered local wares. This was the Maine I remembered, a place where secrets were as common as the fog that rolled in from the ocean. Finally, as dusk began to settle, casting long, purple shadows over the pines, I turned onto a narrow, unpaved road. It wound through a thick stand of spruce, the branches brushing against the car, until it opened onto a breathtaking vista. There it was. My old house. It wasn't a grand estate. Just a simple, two-story clapboard house, weathered gray by decades of sea spray and harsh winters. It stood on a rocky promontory, overlooking a turbulent stretch of the Atlantic. The paint was peeling in places, the porch railings looked a little unstable, and the windows, though clean, seemed like vacant eyes staring out at the vastness. It was semi-dilapidated, barely maintained by a local handyman I'd paid a retainer to for years, insisting it was sentimental. My children had scoffed at it, called it a money pit, a shack. They had no idea. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the roar of the surf crashing against the rocks below and the cry of gulls circling overhead. I sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. A chill, unrelated to the evening air, ran down my spine. Stepping out of the car, the cold wind immediately whipped around me, carrying the unmistakable scent of salt and seaweed. It was invigorating, stinging my cheeks, making my eyes water. It felt like a baptism. The front door, though stiff, opened with a familiar creak. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint, comforting scent of damp wood and forgotten memories. Dust motes danced in the last rays of sunlight filtering through the grimy windows. The furniture was sparse, practical, covered in white sheets. A single, rickety table stood in the center of the main room, flanked by two worn chairs. Against one wall, a tall, narrow bookcase sagged under the weight of books, not the leather-bound classics from my suburban home, but practical guides, obscure historical texts, and stacks of yellowed newspaper clippings. I walked through the silent rooms, my hand trailing along the rough wooden banister of the stairs. Each step evoked a phantom memory, a whisper of the past. The small study, where I had spent countless nights poring over documents, fueled by coffee and an unshakable belief in justice. The bedroom, sparse and functional, where sleep was often a luxury. My gaze settled on a loose floorboard near the hearth in the living room. It was where I'd hidden things. Not valuables, not money. But something far more precious, far more dangerous. The evidence. The truth. The things that could bring Harrison O'Connor crashing down. I had kept them hidden here, a silent promise to myself that one day, when the time was right, they would see the light. And now, the time was right. David's cruel words, my children's entitlement, had unwittingly given me permission. Permission to be the woman I once was. Permission to finish what I had started. Permission to unleash the sleeping serpent. I knelt, my knees protesting slightly, and carefully pried up the loose floorboard. Beneath it, nestled in a waterproof container, lay my past. Yellowed envelopes, faded photographs, meticulous notes in my own precise handwriting. The tools of my old trade. The weapons I had thought I would never wield again. A grim satisfaction spread through me. The quiet life, the gentle grandmother, the respectable matron, that was a mask. This was the true face. And the ocean, crashing relentlessly against the shore outside, seemed to roar its approval. The stage was set. The echoes were no longer just echoes, they were about to become a symphony. The first few days in the old main house were a strange blend of melancholy and exhilarating purpose. Each morning, I would wake to the screech of gulls and the relentless rhythm of the waves, a stark contrast to the pampered silence of my suburban bedroom. I walked the rocky shoreline, breathing in the cold, clean air, letting the wind strip away the last vestiges of my refined persona. My mind, sharp and focused, sifted through old memories, preparing for the task ahead. The house, though sparsely furnished, was a living archive. I spent hours poring over the dusty contents of the bookcase, outdated political theory, historical analyses of corruption, and, most importantly, the meticulous files I had kept hidden. My younger self had been relentlessly organized, categorizing every lead, every witness, every scrap of information related to Harrison O'Connor and the web of deceit he had spun. The files were faded, some brittle with age, but the truth they contained was as potent as ever. I found the coded ledger, the one that detailed O'Connor's initial, illicit financial dealings, how he had siphoned funds from our idealistic group, manipulating our efforts for his own burgeoning empire. I found witness statements, carefully transcribed, from people who had been intimidated, bought off, or simply vanished. There were newspaper clippings from local Maine papers, small-town scandals that had been quietly buried, all tracing back to shell corporations and shadowy figures connected to O'Connor's early ventures. The man wasn't just a corporate titan, he was a master manipulator, a chameleon. He had perfected the art of appearing legitimate while operating in the shadows. My first task, however, was to reach out to the one person I knew I could trust implicitly from that former life, Elijah Thorne. L. He owned a small antique shop in a neighboring coastal town, a quiet man who had always been the grounding force in our fiery little group. He was the only one who had never compromised, never wavered in his quiet integrity. The drive to Els Curios was short, along a scenic route where fishing villages clung to the cliffs like barnacles. The shop itself was a treasure trove of forgotten trinkets and dusty heirlooms, smelling faintly of old wood and ocean air. A bell above the door jingled as I entered, and El, his back to me, was carefully polishing a tarnished silver teapot. He was older now, his once thick dark hair thinned and streaked with gray, his shoulders a little stooped, but his presence was still as solid as the granite cliffs outside. El? My voice was a whisper, a question directed at a ghost. He froze, the polishing cloth still. Slowly, he turned. His eyes, keen and intelligent despite the crow's feet at the corners, widened slightly. Recognition, then a flash of surprise, and finally, a deep, knowing understanding. Meredith. Well, I'll be damned. He smiled, a slow, gentle crinkle around his eyes. Thought you were lost to the land of manicured lawns and garden parties, old friend. I returned his smile, a genuine warmth spreading through me, something I hadn't felt in decades. It seems my children have, shall we say, encouraged me to revisit my roots. He chuckled, a dry, rusty sound. Heard a whisper or two. David, isn't it? Bit of a leech, that one. Always was. He gestured to a worn armchair amidst a clutter of old books and maritime maps. Sit. Tea? We spoke for hours, not just about the present, but about the past. The intervening years evaporated as we reminisced about the heady days of our youth, the battles fought, the loss is mourned. I told him about David's words, the final straw. He listened, his face impassive, occasionally nodding. Then, I shifted to the present. I'm here because of Harrison, L. He's resurfaced. More powerful than ever, by all accounts. Running for Senate. All squeaky clean on the surface. L's jaw tightened, the lines around his mouth deepening. He always was a snake. Knew how to shed his skin. I've been watching him, Meredith. Couldn't help it. His charities, his philanthropy, it's all a front. He's been quietly buying up land along the coast, small businesses, even some fishing licenses. And some of those old names from back then? The ones who went quiet? A few of them have started talking again. Small talk, whispers. But I hear them. My heart hammered. This was what I needed. Validation. Confirmation that I wasn't chasing phantoms. What have you heard, specifically? He's consolidating power, Elle said, pouring us another cup of strong, black tea. And he's doing it with muscle. There's a new player in town, a quiet enforcer type. Ex-military, some say. Cleaning up O'Connor's messes. And a few people have gone silent. Not just quiet, Meredith. Gone. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Harrison was still Harrison, only now with more resources, more impunity. I found the files, L. The old ones. The ledger. The statements. He raised an eyebrow, a spark of the old fire in his eyes. Still the archivist, I see. Good. Always knew you'd keep them safe. But what's the plan, Meredith? You can't just walk in there with a stack of old papers. No, I agreed, gazing out the dusty window at the churning sea. But Claire can. My granddaughter. She's studying journalism. I've given her a hint, pointed her in O'Connor's direction. Elle blinked. You brought the girl into this? Meredith, that's risky. He plays for keeps. So do I, Elle. Always have. And Claire is smart, resourceful. She has the fire. And she has the innocence to ask questions that others wouldn't dare. She's the leverage. A journalist digging into a powerful man's past, it's not the same as an old enemy doing it. Less suspicion. I paused, my gaze hardening. And if he comes for her, he'll come for all of us. Elle studied me for a long moment, then slowly nodded. I see the old spark, Meredith. Been a long time. So, the old serpent is finally uncoiling. The old serpent is ready to strike. L. Harrison O'Connor thinks I'm a harmless old woman, lost in the quiet comfort of my suburban life. He thinks he's erased the past. He thinks he's untouchable. I took a slow sip of tea, the bitter warmth of familiar comfort. He's about to find out how wrong he is. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a familiar thrill of danger and purpose that had been absent for too long. My years of quietude, of pretending to be someone I wasn't, had dulled my senses, but they hadn't extinguished the flame. I was Meredith Blackwood, the one who found the truth, the one who fought the good fight. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for an ideal. I was fighting for justice. For the lives Harrison had ruined. And, perhaps, for a reckoning with my own past, a final act of courage that would justify the long years of silence. As I drove back to my secluded house, the vast, empty expanse of the ocean stretching out beside me, I knew that the quiet life I had so carefully constructed was shattered beyond repair. But in its place, a different life was emerging, one born of necessity and old grudges. Harrison O'Connor was about to discover that some ghosts refuse to stay buried. And some old women, when pushed too far, become the most formidable of adversaries. The game, as Elle said, was definitely afoot. And I intended to win. The next few weeks were a delicate dance between two worlds. My days in Maine were a whirlwind of clandestine work, cross-referencing old files, making discreet calls to dusty archives, and, most importantly, keeping a vigilant eye on any subtle shifts in the local power dynamics that El had warned me about. El, true to his nature, proved to be an invaluable resource, a quiet spider at the center of a web of local gossip and overlooked facts. He'd occasionally leave anonymous newspaper clippings for me, or vague messages hinting at unusual land deals or unexplained absences of local figures. It was all adding to the dossier on Harrison O'Connor. Meanwhile, my phone provided a portal to my other life, the one I was slowly dismantling. David's calls had become less frequent, his tone oscillating between desperate pleading and outright anger. He'd left a particularly nasty voicemail threatening to expose my eccentricities to the family and implying that I was losing my mind. Laura, more strategically, had tried to enlist Claire's help in reasoning with Grandma, a plea my granddaughter had politely but firmly declined. Claire. My little spark. She was delving into Harrison O'Connor with the earnest intensity of a true journalist. Her calls to me were frequent, filled with a mixture of excitement and growing unease. "Grandma, this is fascinating," she'd said one evening, her voice buzzing with energy. "His official bio is so polished, so squeaky clean. But when you start digging into the details, there are gaps. Huge gaps. Like, where did he get his initial capital for his first tech venture? Before the big boom. It just says private investment, but there are no records of that private investor, not really. It's a ghost." "Keep digging, my dear," I encouraged, a thrill running through me. "Ghosts, as you'll learn, often have very real bodies beneath their shrouds." "And the main connection," she exclaimed. "You were right. I found records of several property sales from about 40 years ago, all along the coast, near where you said. Small plots, but they were bought by a shell corporation with an address that now traces back to one of O'Connor's holding companies. Nothing illegal, on the surface, but it's odd." "Indeed. Keep pulling that thread, Claire. The most seemingly insignificant details can unravel the largest tapestries." I deliberately held back specific details about O'Connor's treachery, allowing Claire to discover the connections on her own. It would make her findings more authentic, more devastating. But O'Connor wasn't idle. A man of his power and influence had ears everywhere. My sudden, drastic change in behavior, combined with Claire's quiet inquiries, was bound to register on his radar. El had warned me. "Meredith, some of O'Connor's boys have been poking around the antique shops," El reported one afternoon, his voice low over the phone. "Asking about an older woman, well-dressed, but with a sharp look. And they've been asking about me, too. Asking if I've had any unusual visitors lately." A cold tendril of apprehension snaked around my heart. He knew. Or at least, he suspected. My sudden reappearance in Maine, my quiet inquiries, Claire's burgeoning investigation, it was too much of a coincidence. He was consolidating his power, tying up loose ends, and I was a very old, very inconvenient loose end. That evening, as I stood by the window, watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, I felt a distinct sense of being watched. It was a sensation I hadn't experienced in decades, but it was as familiar as my own heartbeat. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I checked the perimeter of the house, noting the fresh tracks in the damp earth near the old shed. Not animal. Too large, too deliberate. He was testing the waters. Seeing if the old serpent still had bite. The true conflict, however, came from an unexpected quarter. David. Desperate, humiliated, and now fueled by a potent cocktail of panic and rage, he decided to accelerate his threats. He wasn't just attempting to manipulate me anymore, he was actively trying to sabotage me. "Mom, this has to stop," his email blared, its subject line in all caps. "I know you're in Maine. I know you're doing something weird. Laura's worried sick, and honestly, so am I. If you don't reinstate my funds, I swear, I will tell Laura everything about that house, about your eccentricities, about how you've been living a double life. She deserves to know." He wasn't bluffing this time. He was desperate enough to burn bridges, even his own. And the truth, twisted through his resentful lens, could hurt Laura, could certainly disrupt Claire's focus. I stared at the screen, a chilling calm descending upon me. David had always been a loose cannon, but this was a new level of self-destructive malice. He was trying to use my own secrets against me, secrets he barely understood, but sensed held power. I picked up the phone and called him. He answered immediately, a breathless desperation in his voice. "Mom? Are you reconsidering? I knew you would. It's not too late. Just send the money, and we can forget all about this." "David," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "Let me make myself perfectly clear. If you breathe one word to Laura, or anyone else, about my property in Maine, about anything I choose to do with my life, I will not only ensure you never see another penny from me, but I will actively work to ensure you never receive a single cent from any future inheritance. I will donate everything to obscure charities, establish trusts for stray cats, anything to keep it out of your grasp. Do you understand?" There was a stunned silence. My threat, I knew, was far more potent than his. His desperation stemmed from a lack of resources, mine from a lifetime of careful planning. "You wouldn't," he finally choked out, his voice thin with disbelief and fear. "Oh, David, I would. You wished me dead. You underestimated me. And now you threaten to expose a past you know nothing about, a past that could put not just me, but others, in grave danger. That is unforgivable. You have crossed a line from which there is no return. Consider this your final warning. Cross it again, and you will learn the true meaning of being cut off. Not just from money, but from family, from everything." I hung up, my hand trembling slightly, a cold fury coursing through me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about loyalty, about trust, about the corrosive power of entitlement. David had become a liability, a pawn in a game he didn't even realize he was playing. He was a threat to my mission, and worse, a potential threat to Claire. The stakes had just been raised. Not just by Harrison O'Connor, who was undoubtedly sending his own quiet signals, but by my own son. The first spark of conflict had ignited, and it promised to burn fiercely. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the quiet life I had once lived was truly dead. And the battle for the truth, for justice, and for my own legacy had only just begun. The confrontation with David left a bitter taste, a metallic tang of regret and resolve. It solidified my understanding that I stood alone, truly alone, in this endeavor. Even my own blood was either a pawn or a potential threat. Yet, the solitude also brought a peculiar clarity, an unburdened focus. I was free of the need to protect their fragile sensibilities, free to be the woman I needed to be. My days at the main house became a methodical excavation. Not just of documents, but of memories. The old floorboard in the living room held more than just papers, it held pieces of me, shards of a past self I had meticulously sealed away. I retrieved the waterproof container, its contents crackling with age as I carefully removed them. Yellowed photographs, not the smiling family portraits, but stark, black and white images. Young faces, some now dust, some undoubtedly still bearing the scars of what Harrison had done. A picture of me, perhaps 30 years old, standing beside Elle, both of us looking grimly determined, holding protest signs in front of a sprawling, ominous-looking corporate building. The idealism in my eyes was still visible, but already tempered by the harsh realities we faced. Then there were the journals. My own journals, kept meticulously in an archaic shorthand, detailing every meeting, every suspicion, every piece of information we had gathered about O'Connor's early, predatory business practices. Entries about illicit land deals, environmental violations quietly covered up, small businesses strong-armed into selling, often at absurdly low prices, to shell companies that always, eventually, led back to O'Connor. The cold, hard facts were all there, painstakingly recorded. One journal, bound in dark green leather, held particular significance. It contained the names. The names of witnesses who had gone missing, who had been silenced, who had simply disappeared from small coastal towns. Dates, locations, even fragments of their last known movements. These weren't just names on a page, they were lives, each one a testament to O'Connor's ruthless ambition. As I reread my own words from decades past, a chilling realization solidified. I hadn't just been naive, I had been reckless. Driven by a desperate need for justice, I had plunged headfirst into a world far more brutal than I had understood. I had witnessed things, done things, made choices that still haunted the quieter corners of my mind. The line between right and wrong had blurred, then twisted, then dissolved entirely in the gray moral landscape of that fight. I remembered one specific incident, a tense night in a rundown warehouse, a desperate attempt to retrieve stolen documents that could expose O'Connor. Things had gone sideways. A scuffle. A choice. A sudden, terrifying moment when I had to decide between my own safety and the mission. I had chosen the mission, making a split-second decision that had saved our operation but left a deep, unhealable wound on my conscience. That was the moment I truly understood the cost of this fight. That was the moment the younger Meredith began to die, slowly, quietly, giving way to the woman who sought solace in domesticity. The memory was like a ghost in the room, a cold breath on my neck. I had buried that part of me not just for my family, but for my own survival, for my sanity. The guilt, the fear, the constant vigilance, it had been exhausting. But now, as I held the proof of O'Connor's enduring evil in my hands, that younger, harder self began to reassert herself. The guilt was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, protective anger. Not just for myself, but for the victims, for Claire, for anyone else who might fall prey to O'Connor's insatiable greed. My hands, though aged and slightly arthritic, were still capable. I began to digitize the most crucial documents, scanning the old papers into a secure, encrypted drive. It was tedious work, but each click of the scanner was an act of defiance, a quiet resurrection of the truth. I sent encrypted copies of some general background information, publicly available but obscure details about O'Connor's early career, to Claire, subtly guiding her without revealing the full extent of my own involvement, or the dangerous nature of the information. Meanwhile, Elle's warnings proved prescient. A local fisherman, usually reliable for small repairs around the house, called to say he'd seen some slick-looking city boys asking about the old Blackwood place. They'd been driving a dark, unmarked sedan, and had asked too many specific questions about the house's isolation, its nearest neighbors. They weren't looking to buy, Meredith, the fisherman, a gruff old man named Silas, had said, his voice laced with suspicion. They were looking to scope it out. Like they were casing the joint. My heart pounded, a drumbeat of approaching danger. O'Connor wasn't just sending feelers anymore. He was actively investigating. My presence in Maine, coupled with Claire's inquiries, had clearly alarmed him. He was a man who left no loose ends, and I was the biggest, most dangerous loose end of all. I looked around the old house. It was sparsely furnished, but it was my house. And it had always been a fortress of sorts, not just physically, but emotionally. I had chosen its isolation for a reason. I knew its creaks and groans, its secret passages and hidden nooks. It was a place I could defend. A flicker of a memory, a younger Elle, teaching me how to set a simple tripwire alarm using fishing line and empty cans. Another, how to disarm an intruder with surprising efficiency, using leverage rather than brute force. My body, though old, remembered the muscle memory. The mind, though burdened by years of domesticity, still held the strategic brilliance. I walked to the kitchen, a sense of urgency propelling me. I had to secure the evidence. And I had to prepare. The house had always been a haven, but now, it had to become a battleground. I checked the locks, reinforced the windows, and retrieved a small, unassuming box from the back of an old pantry. Inside, nestled amongst old canning jars, was a sturdy, well-maintained revolver, wrapped in an oilcloth. It was old, but impeccably cared for. My father's, from his days as a game warden. A relic from a different kind of fight. I weighed it in my hand, the cold metal a familiar presence. The feel of it was both terrifying and strangely comforting. I had hoped never to have to use it, never to return to this life. But David's words, "I wish you would just die," had made me realize something profound. I was already dead, in a way. The woman I truly was had been buried. And if I was to live again, if I was to finally settle these ancient scores, I would have to be ready to fight for it. Harrison O'Connor had thought he was safe. He had believed that the past was dead, and the old woman who held its keys was harmless. He was about to discover that some old women have very long memories. And that the price of silence, when finally paid, could be far more devastating than he could ever imagine. The game was no longer afoot. It was a duel. And I intended to be the last one standing. The quiet surveillance around my main house intensified. I could feel the invisible threads of O'Connor's network tightening, probes extending, testing the strength of my solitude. Silas, the fisherman, called again to report an unfamiliar boat lingering in the cove below my property, its crew seemingly engaged in casual fishing, yet always turning their gaze towards my house. It was clear, Harrison O'Connor had decided I was no longer an annoyance, but a legitimate threat. His direct actions began subtly. My internet connection, usually reliable, became intermittent. My landline buzzed with static, occasionally dropping calls. Small, insignificant inconveniences, designed to isolate, to annoy, to suggest that I was being watched, that my communication was being monitored. He was playing psychological warfare, a tactic he'd always favored. He wanted to make me feel vulnerable, to push me into a mistake. But I wasn't the young, easily rattled idealist anymore. Decades of living a double life had honed my patience, my ability to appear harmless while orchestrating unseen movements. I used a burner phone for sensitive calls, encrypting my digital communications with a practiced hand. I knew my old house intimately, every creak and shadow, every vantage point. And I knew Harrison O'Connor. He underestimated me, as he always had. The more urgent front, however, was still my family. David, after my stark warning, had retreated into a furious silence, but I knew it wouldn't last. He was a creature of comfort and resentment, and deprived of the former, the latter would fester. It was Laura who truly surprised me. She arrived unannounced one gray afternoon, her luxury SUV looking starkly out of place on the rocky drive. Her face was etched with a mixture of anger, concern, and a deep, unsettling fear. "Mom, what on earth is going on?" she demanded, stepping inside, her gaze sweeping over the Spartan interior of my main home with thinly veiled disapproval. "David is convinced you've lost your mind. He says you're involved in something dangerous, something illegal. And he's threatening to go to the police." I led her to the small, rickety table, pouring her a cup of the strong, black tea I'd been living on. "David is a desperate man, Laura. Desperate men say desperate things. And do desperate things." I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the carefully applied makeup and the expensive clothes to the underlying anxiety. Unlike David, Laura possessed a core of decency, however buried under layers of privilege. "But, the money, Mom," she began, her voice softening. "My children's tuition, the house, it's all in jeopardy. And David's gone completely off the rails." "Yes," I conceded, "he has. And perhaps, my dear, it is time for you to understand why." I hesitated. How much to tell her? She wasn't Claire, with her journalist's instincts and innate understanding of injustice. Laura was more fragile, more accustomed to comfort. But she was my daughter, and the truth, however ugly, deserved to be heard. "Laura," I began, my voice low, "there are things about my past that I have deliberately kept from you both. From everyone. I met your father, Robert, later in my life. Before him, there was a different life. A life where I fought for what I believed in, against powerful, corrupt forces." She stared at me, bewildered. "What are you talking about? You were always just..." "Mom." A homemaker. A very effective masquerade, wouldn't you say? I managed a wry smile. But before that, I was involved in something significant. We were a group, young and idealistic, trying to expose a network of corruption that reached high into business and political circles. And at the heart of that corruption was a man named Harrison O'Connor. Laura gasped. Harrison O'Connor? The philanthropist? The one running for Senate? Mom, you're talking about a multi-billionaire. What could you possibly have to do with him? More than you can imagine. He was one of us, at first. Or so we thought. But he betrayed us. Used our efforts, our information, for his own ruthless gain. He built his empire on the backs of stolen ideas, crushed dreams, and, in some cases, vanished lives. He systematically destroyed anyone who stood in his way, or who knew too much. My voice hardened, remembering the faces in the old photographs. I spent years gathering proof, evidence of his early crimes. And when our group was ultimately broken, when too many friends were lost or silenced, I realized I had to disappear. I had to become someone else, for my own survival. For a chance at a normal life. With your father. With you. Laura was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. You mean, you were like a spy? A resistance fighter? Something like that, I admitted, a bitter humor in my voice. And I thought I had buried that life. Until David's words. Until his utter contempt reminded me that my quiet sacrifice had been for naught. That the world was still full of Harrison O'Connors, and I still had unfinished business. I pushed a small, discreetly wrapped package across the table to her. This is for Claire. It's a collection of documents, public records, old articles. Things that will help her in her investigation into O'Connor. It's disguised as research material for her thesis, but she'll know what to do with it. She has a good mind for this. But you must ensure it gets to her safely. And you must not, under any circumstances, allow David to get his hands on it. Or to tell anyone else. Laura picked up the package, her hands trembling. Mom, this is insane. You can't possibly think you can take on Harrison O'Connor. He's too powerful. He'll crush you. Perhaps, I said, my gaze steady. Or perhaps he will discover that a quiet, old woman with a very long memory can be the most dangerous adversary of all. I have chosen this path, Laura. Not out of spite, but out of a fierce, unyielding need for justice. For those he destroyed. And perhaps, for the younger woman I once was. I saw the conflict in her eyes, fear, disbelief, but also a flicker of something new, respect. And a nascent understanding that the mother she thought she knew was a stranger, forged in fire. David threatened to go to the police, she whispered again, as if the words themselves were a curse. Let him, I said, a chilling calm in my voice. Let him try. But first, he will have to explain his own desperate debts, his own attempts at extortion. And he will have to face the consequences of wishing his own mother dead. You see, Laura, the game has indeed begun. And your brother, in his greed, has become merely a pawn in someone else's war. He just doesn't realize it yet. I watched her drive away, the SUV's taillights disappearing into the twilight. Laura was shocked, but I had given her a glimpse behind the curtain. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about something far larger, far more dangerous. The silence in the house, after she left, felt different. Heavy. Foreboding. O'Connor's men were out there, a palpable presence in the encroaching darkness. I could feel their eyes, their patient menace. But I was ready. The old house, my sanctuary, was about to become my battleground. And Harrison O'Connor, the untouchable titan, was about to learn that some gifts, especially those wished upon you by your own son, come with a terrible, unquantifiable price. The spark I had ignited in Claire, the truth I had revealed to Laura, was about to become a roaring inferno. The night after Laura's visit, the tension in the old house became almost suffocating. The air itself seemed to vibrate with unseen eyes, unheard whispers. I had fortified the house as best I could, old wooden planks jammed against the window frames, furniture strategically placed to impede easy entry, the revolver from my father's days kept within easy reach. My senses, honed by years of suppressed vigilance, were on high alert. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind, was analyzed, assessed. The true test came just after midnight. A faint scratching sound at the back door, near the old pantry. Not a single scratch, but a series of precise, deliberate attempts to jimmy the lock. My heart pounded, but my mind was coldly rational. They weren't trying to break in quietly, they were announcing their presence. They wanted to intimidate, to scare. To make me run. I moved silently, a ghost in my own home, slipping into the shadows of the living room. My hand closed around the cold grip of the revolver, its weight familiar, reassuring in a perverse way. This wasn't a game. Harrison O'Connor had decided to show his hand. And I, Meredith Blackwood, was ready to play mine. A heavy thump against the back door. Then another. They were going to force their way in. I took a deep, steadying breath, remembering Elle's lessons on breath control, on focusing the mind. The back door splintered inward with a crash. Two hulking figures, silhouetted against the dim moonlight, entered the kitchen. They were large men, professionals, probably ex-military, just as Elle had suggested. One carried a flashlight, its beam sweeping wildly, looking for me. "Old lady. We know you're here. Just hand over the files, and nobody gets hurt," one of them growled, his voice thick with menace. I remained still, a shadow within shadows. They were searching for a frail old woman, easy prey. They would find a different kind of adversary. As they moved cautiously into the living room, their boots scuffing on the bare floorboards, I sprang my first trap. A fishing line, strung taut and low, catching the shin of the lead man. He tripped, cursing, sprawling forward with a heavy thud. The flashlight flew from his hand, clattering into a corner, plunging the room into deeper gloom. "What the hell was that?" the second man hissed, momentarily disoriented. "Just a little welcome committee," I murmured, stepping out of the shadows, my voice clear and surprisingly strong. The revolver was aimed squarely at the chest of the man who was struggling to get to his feet. He froze, his eyes wide as he saw me, a tiny, gray-haired woman holding a deadly weapon. You crazy old hag." "Perhaps," I conceded, my finger tightening ever so slightly on the trigger. "But I assure you, I am not harmless. Now, get out of my house." The second man, more cunning, tried to flank me. But I had anticipated that. Another tripwire, cleverly concealed, tangled around his ankles. He let out a yelp of surprise, losing his balance and crashing into an antique armoire, sending it toppling with a loud splintering sound. They were disoriented, bruised, and clearly underestimated me. But they were still two strong men, and I was just one old woman. I knew I couldn't hold them off indefinitely. This was a delaying tactic, a show of force, to buy time. Just then, my burner phone, tucked into my pocket, vibrated. It was a text message. From David. A single, chilling line: "O'Connor knows about the old ledger. He knows where you kept it. He thanks me for the tip." A cold and visceral wave of betrayal washed over me, eclipsing the fear, the adrenaline. David. My own son. He had actively helped Harrison O'Connor, given him information, sold me out for what he hoped would be a return to his cushioned life. He had finally crossed every conceivable line. He hadn't just wished me dead, he had actively assisted those who sought to silence me. The last thread of maternal affection snapped, irrevocably. He was no longer my son. He was a tool, a weapon in O'Connor's arsenal. My resolve, already iron-hard, now became steel. There was no turning back. No more protecting David, no more holding back for fear of consequences. The gloves were off. "You're too late," I told the two men, my voice now devoid of any tremor, any hint of fear. It was a voice honed by decades of suppressed rage. The ledger, the evidence, it's no longer here. And the information you seek is already on its way to where it needs to be. The first man, recovering his composure, lunged. I sidestepped, my movements surprisingly fluid for my age, and brought the butt of the revolver down hard on his temple. He cried out, staggering back, a trickle of blood appearing on his hairline. I said, "Get out," I repeated, my voice a low, dangerous growl. "You tell Harrison O'Connor that the old woman he thought he buried is very much alive. And she's coming for him." They looked at each other, battered and bewildered. They had expected an easy mark, a scared old woman. They had found a viper. Grumbling, clutching their bruised limbs, they stumbled out the broken back door, disappearing into the night. I stood there, breathing heavily, the revolver still warm in my hand. The adrenaline slowly receded, leaving me with a profound exhaustion, but also a fierce satisfaction. They had underestimated me. But the battle was far from over. David's betrayal, however, was the true turning point. He had unwittingly provided the final piece of my resolve. Harrison knew I had the ledger, and David had revealed the secret hiding place. My plan to carefully guide Claire through her journalistic investigation now needed to accelerate dramatically. There was no time for subtlety. I went to my secure laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The encrypted files, the digitized evidence, the meticulous records of O'Connor's crimes, they were all ready. I had pre-programmed a dead man's switch, a timed release if I failed to check in. But now, I couldn't wait. I found Claire's secure email address, the one she used for her most sensitive journalistic inquiries. I attached the encrypted files, the culmination of decades of suppressed truth and recent, feverish work. Then I typed a single, urgent message. "Claire, dear. The time for subtle investigation is over. They know I have the evidence. Your uncle, David, has unfortunately made that clear to Harrison O'Connor. This package contains everything. The ledger, the witness statements, the proof. It's all there. Get it to your most trusted professor, or to a reputable news organization. Publish it. Discredit him. Don't wait. And be careful. Very, very careful. He will come for you now. Protect yourself. And protect the truth. This is no longer just my fight. It is ours. And justice, my dear, is long overdue." I clicked send. The message, carrying decades of secrets and the weight of a lifetime's struggle, vanished into the digital ether. My hand, now trembling again, was not from fear, but from the magnitude of the act. I had just unleashed a storm. The silence that settled back into the broken house was different from before. It was not the silence of waiting, or of preparation. It was the silence of a declaration of war. Harrison O'Connor had sent his men to hunt an old woman for her secrets. He was about to discover that the old woman had just released an avalanche of truth. And his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. This was the point of no return. The true climax. And I, Meredith Blackwood, was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 10, Final Chess Game. The hours after sending that email to Claire stretched into an agonizing eternity. The house was a wreck, the back door gaping open, letting in the cold night air and the unsettling silence. I patched it up as best I could with spare lumber and a heavy chain, a symbolic gesture more than a true barrier. My body ached, my head throbbed, but my mind was clearer than it had been in decades. David's betrayal had stripped away any lingering illusions, leaving only a sharp, brutal clarity. He was a lost cause, a cautionary tale. My focus now was solely on O'Connor and the truth. I tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I sat by the window, the old revolver still beside me, watching the first blush of dawn paint the eastern sky. The ocean continued its relentless roar, a constant reminder of the forces unleashed. Then, my burner phone buzzed. It was Claire. "Grandma, I got it. Her voice was a mixture of awe, terror, and exhilaration. I can't believe all of it. This is huge. It's beyond anything I could have imagined. Harrison O'Connor is a monster. He is, I agreed, my voice raspy. And now, my dear, the world needs to know. I've already sent everything to Professor Evans, she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. He teaches investigative journalism. He's got connections at the New York Times, the Washington Post. He says this is Pulitzer material. He's assembling a team of his best students. We're verifying every single detail, cross-referencing everything you sent. We're going to break this wide open. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so intense it almost brought me to my knees. The truth was out. The serpent's venom was finally flowing into the public consciousness. Good, Claire. Very good, I managed, a faint, weary smile touching my lips. Be careful. Extremely careful. O'Connor will realize what's happening very quickly. He won't go down without a fight. I know, she said, a newfound maturity in her voice. But he won't get to us. We're working from a secure location. And Grandma, thank you. For trusting me. For everything. I hung up, a sense of completion settling over me. The primary mission was accomplished. The truth, finally, had a voice. Now came the reckoning. And the reckoning came swiftly. Within hours, the first tremors began. Social media buzzed with whispers. Then, local news outlets picked up on the vague, initial reports. By late afternoon, the New York Times had published its first, cautiously worded but deeply damning article, citing anonymous but highly credible sources and newly unearthed historical documents that implicated Harrison O'Connor in a decades-long pattern of corporate malfeasance, environmental crimes, and the mysterious disappearances of former associates. The story exploded. O'Connor, in a desperate attempt to salvage his meticulously crafted image, scheduled an emergency press conference. He would deny everything, spin a tale of political sabotage and personal vendetta. He would try to discredit me, paint me as a deranged old woman. I knew his playbook. But I had one more move in this final chess game. I called, my voice firm. He's giving a press conference tonight. 7 p.m. at the Portland Convention Center. I need you to arrange something for me. Ever laconic but ever understanding, simply said, consider it done, Meredith. What do you need? My plan was simple, audacious, and profoundly dangerous. I wouldn't just let the truth speak, I would force O'Connor to reveal his true face to the world, in person. As the sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the Maine coast, I dressed in the simple, dark clothes I favored now. I left the revolver behind. This wasn't a physical confrontation anymore. This was about exposing a soul. Drove me, his antique Ford pickup rumbling steadily towards Portland. He dropped me a few blocks from the convention center, a knowing glance passing between us. Be safe, Meredith. I always am, in my own way. The convention center was a hive of activity. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, and security guards were everywhere. O'Connor's carefully orchestrated stage was set, a podium draped in patriotic bunting, a large screen behind him displaying his campaign logo, a phalanx of smiling advisors. He walked to the podium, impeccably dressed, his face a mask of confident indignation, ready to play the victim. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice booming, I stand before you today not as a politician, but as a man falsely accused. These scurrilous, baseless allegations are nothing more than a desperate attempt by shadowy figures to derail my campaign, to attack the very principles of progress and philanthropy I represent. He launched into a practiced diatribe, dismissing the revelations as unsubstantiated rumors and the ramblings of disaffected individuals. He was good. Too good. He almost made you believe him. That's when I made my entrance. Bless his cunning heart, had arranged for an anonymous tip to a minor local news channel that an important witness would be arriving shortly. As I stepped through the double doors at the back of the press conference hall, dressed in my simple dark clothes, my gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, every eye in the room turned to me. A hushed silence fell. O'Connor, mid-sentence, faltered. His eyes, fixed on my face, widened in genuine shock, then narrowed into a furious, predatory glare. The confident mask shattered, revealing the raw anger and fear beneath. "Meredith," he hissed, the name a venomous whisper, audible only to a few. I walked slowly, deliberately, down the aisle towards the front, my head held high. The cameras, sensing a dramatic turn, swiveled to follow me. The reporters, sensing blood in the water, began to shout questions. "Mr. O'Connor, do you know this woman? Is this the disaffected individual you mentioned? Who is she?" I stopped directly in front of the podium, just out of O'Connor's reach, my gaze locked onto his. "He knows who I am," I said, my voice cutting through the rising clamor, clear and strong, amplified by the microphones. "I am Meredith Blackwood. And I am here to tell you, Mr. O'Connor, that your lies end tonight." O'Connor lunged, a sudden, furious movement, but his security guards restrained him, looking bewildered. "She's a lunatic. A disturbed old woman. Get her out of here," he roared, his face contorted with rage, his carefully constructed composure utterly destroyed. "A lunatic?" I countered, my voice steady, my eyes never leaving his. "Or simply a witness, Mr. O'Connor? A witness to the truth. The truth of the men you silenced, the lands you stole, the lives you crushed. The truth of how you built your empire on betrayal and deceit." His face was crimson, his hands balled into fists. He was trapped. Forced to react, forced to reveal his true, ugly nature in front of the world. "She's lying. This is a smear campaign. She's nothing but a senile old woman with a grudge," he shrieked, no longer the composed philanthropist, but a man unraveling under pressure. "A grudge?" I asked, a bitter smile touching my lips. "Perhaps. But also the truth. And the truth, Mr. O'Connor, has a way of coming back to haunt you. No matter how many decades you try to bury it. No matter how many people you try to silence." My words, amplified by the cameras, were broadcast live across the nation. The image of the calm, dignified old woman confronting the enraged, sputtering politician was stark, devastating. He couldn't dismiss me as an anonymous source. He couldn't hide. He was exposed, his true nature laid bare for all to see. The entire press conference dissolved into chaos, reporters clamoring, O'Connor yelling incoherently, his staff trying to pull him away. My part was done. I turned, a profound weariness settling over me, and walked out of the convention center, leaving the storm to rage behind me. The truth was out. And the silence, finally, was shattered. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Harrison O'Connor. The public spectacle of his unmasking, broadcast live, sealed his fate. Claire's article, meticulously researched and powerfully written, published online by the New York Times mere hours after the press conference, provided the irrefutable evidence. The ledger, the witness statements, the details of the shell corporations, it was all there, damning and undeniable. His philanthropic empire crumbled, his political aspirations evaporated, and within days, federal investigators, spurred by the overwhelming evidence and public outrage, launched a full-scale investigation into his past dealings. Arrest warrants were issued for O'Connor and several of his key associates. The Titan had fallen. For me, Meredith Blackwood, the fall of O'Connor brought a strange mix of exhilaration and profound emptiness. The lifelong burden I had carried, the silent promise to a younger self, was finally fulfilled. Justice, however delayed, had been served. But the price had been steep. My family, naturally, was in an uproar. Laura called, her voice choked with tears, not of regret for O'Connor, but of shock and confusion. "Mom, the news. It's everywhere. What have you done?" Who are you? I am who I always was, Laura, I replied, my voice calm but distant. Just a little less encumbered now. I told you, there were old debts. They have been paid. She was still reeling, trying to reconcile the image of her gentle, refined mother with the formidable woman who had brought down a powerful magnate. It would take time, if ever, for her to truly understand. But I sensed a shift in her, a nascent respect, perhaps even a glimmer of understanding. She had seen firsthand the consequences of greed and deceit, and the power of truth. Claire, on the other hand, was soaring. Her article was lauded, her reputation as a fearless investigative journalist cemented. She called me, her voice filled with a vibrant energy I hadn't heard in years from anyone. Grandma, it's incredible. The story is everywhere. You're a hero. I am merely a woman who finally finished what she started, my dear, I corrected gently. But you, Claire, you are the voice. You are the future. Use it wisely. She promised she would. And I believed her. She had found her purpose, guided by the echoes of my own, and it was a powerful, beautiful thing to witness. David, however, faced a reckoning far more personal. His role in providing O'Connor with information about the ledger, his casual betrayal of his own mother, became known during the investigation. Though not directly criminal, it painted a damning picture of his character. Laura, disgusted, cut him off entirely. His few remaining friends, embarrassed by his public humiliation and association with a now disgraced criminal, abandoned him. His desperate attempts to salvage his finances were met with closed doors and cold shoulders. The bank foreclosed on his condo. He was left utterly alone, stripped of his comfortable life, facing the harsh realities of a world he had always expected others to cushion for him. His wish had indeed come true, I was dead to him and he was dead to me. The gift of self-sufficiency, as I had promised, was a bitter, solitary one. I returned to my old house in Maine. The broken back door was now properly repaired, the scent of fresh pine mingling with the ever-present tang of salt. The house, once a fortress of secrets, now felt like a sanctuary of peace. The files, the journals, the evidence, they were all gone, handed over to the authorities or carefully archived by Claire for future academic study. My past was no longer a burden, it was a story, finally told. I sat on the weathered porch, a glass of amber scotch in my hand, watching the tumultuous ocean. The sun, a brilliant orb, dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. It was a spectacular sight, a daily reminder of nature's relentless cycle of destruction and renewal. I felt old. Profoundly, deeply old. But I also felt free. The weight of all those years of silence, of pretense, of living a life that wasn't entirely mine, had lifted. The woman I had buried for so long had finally been allowed to breathe, to fight, to complete her mission. There was a bittersweet melancholy in the freedom. The quiet companionship of my husband, the innocent dependence of my young children, those were gone, replaced by the stark reality of my choices. But in this new reality, there was also a profound sense of self. I was no longer defined by what others expected of me, or by the secrets I kept. I was simply Meredith. Meredith Blackwood, a woman who had faced her demons, settled her scores, and emerged, weary but unbowed. The wind whipped around me, carrying the scent of the sea, the cries of distant gulls. I took a slow sip of my scotch, the warmth spreading through me. My journey hadn't ended with a fairy tale. There was no grand, triumphant parade. Just the quiet satisfaction of a life, finally, honestly lived. The world was a little fairer, a little cleaner, because of what I had done. And I, an old woman on a windswept coast, had finally found my peace. Not the peace of oblivion, but the hard-won peace of a battle fought and won. The ocean roared, a timeless lullaby.